So you want to make sure that as you split into those different levels, you're very careful. And then finally, the last is some sort of catastrophic event where I need to reinstall hardware and or software in the system. So as I start to take a look at who's handling what, I split into three general things. The first is basically, is it an internal team that's going to be handling it? Is it an external team that's going to be handling it? And if it's an external team, is it going to be some sort of contracted support, help desks, I've got some sort of SLA, or is it going to be the vendors themselves? And you need to figure out where do I want to start to split those lines. Because if you're a large organization with a huge support desk, you can probably handle all the way up through and including potentially level 2 internally. Other folks will feel comfortable going up through and including level 1. And some others say, you know what, if we need to pick up the phone, we want to call some third party. And that's just fine. So what I can then start to do is say, all right, I've got scheduled, detected, and requested events. So based on that, this is how I want to route. So if it's an automated resolution, I've got my monitoring system that finds out that I have an event, it fixes the problem, and it notifies me that, hey, I fixed this event, because you don't want the system to automatically correct configurations and never actually tell you that it's changing configurations, because God forbid that system goes out of control. Now you're in real trouble. If it's a requested event, the point of contact then identifies an issue to the help desk, and you have an escalation procedure complete with issue tracking. And then at that point, we somehow route to either hardware or software. And you may have the same guy, so if it's a small internal shop, you may have the same person who's both the expert in RFID hardware and RFID software, but they need to be able to tell the difference between the two for sure. And let me paint an example from one of our customers. So if you look at the Department of Defense, when they deployed their installation at 72 facilities across the U.S., they contracted for different parts of the installation separately. They contracted for hardware from ODIN and all the hardware installation. They contracted for software through GlobeRanger and the software workflow, and they already had a network installed. When they called up to make a request saying, hey, RFID is down, the first 10 times they called, and by the way, it's down, we're going to pay for someone to fly out and replace this reader, it's down. 6 of those 10 were the network was just having problems and it wasn't paying. Something that you should be able to do some very basic things and say, hey, you know what, why don't I try to ping all the readers here? And if I can ping some other readers, perhaps this is a network problem and not if I can't ping any of the readers, perhaps this is a network problem, not an RFID problem. 3 of those 10 were software problems. The GlobeRanger software stack had reported a buffer overflow, or it was buffer overflow, but it was reporting that the reader was down. And because the software said the reader was down, the reported problem was hardware. But it turns out it was just a bug in the software, a patch fixed it, no problem. And only 1 was actually a hardware problem. So as we started to fly out and log these things, we realized that this was incredibly expensive and we needed some way to start to resolve these problems automatically and really detect things. Because you'll find that there's hardware, there's software, there's network problems. But the other thing, and it seems very straightforward, is power. A lot of times the very first thing we ask is there power to the device? And people, they sort of laugh. The first question is it plugged in? And you figure this thing is hardwired into the wall, how can it not be plugged in? But you know what, there's a lot of times where some breaker blew or something like that, and rather than sending RFID guys to replace the reader, perhaps you should just send an electrician or send some guy over to hit the circuit breaker. So what we want in terms of a package of support is a number of different things. The first, of course, is you should demand from your installation team detailed documentation. This includes everything, including the entire bill of materials. So Daniel, in his last section, talked about how it's not just readers and antennas, but you've got cables, you've got connectors, you've got different GPIO ports, you've got all kinds of various components. If the One of the issues that's happened to us in the past is people say, it's not working. What's not working? Well, it should blink yellow when the reader is reading. Well, you know why it wasn't blinking yellow? Because the yellow light blew out. And knowing the bill of materials that you've got these yellow lights that you can replace is very critical when you've got some sort of thing that you need to fix. So make sure you have comprehensive documentation of the installation and a history of changes. This has been something that's very difficult because particularly when you're in a situation, if you haven't taken a scientific approach, the inclination is always to go on site. If you get low read rates or you get stray reads or something like that, your first inclination is to start tweaking with the configuration. All right, I'm going to play with the power. Okay, I'm going to play with the Q value. And no one goes and bothers to say, all right, this is what my power was originally at when I installed and it was working well, and this is what my Q value was at. You want to make sure you have a history of all your changes and how your performance was. Because, for example, one of our clients called up and they had said, you know what, our RFID performance is really changing between winter and summer because they're outdoor readers, and the humidity and temperature is a huge variance, so the amount of read range they have is different. And they switch it, but they don't know what they switch back and forth between. So if you've got that documented, it's real easy to switch, and you can probably switch it remotely. You don't have to send anyone out there, which, you know, if Hurricane Hannah's blowing through, you certainly don't want to send anyone out there. Make sure you have your training set up so that all of the operations folks on site know. They really are your first line of defense, and the more educated the people on the ground are about the RFID installation, the less you're going to get those phone calls that say, hey, RFID just isn't working. And they're going to be bought into the use case, and they're going to be bought into being able to use this system to their advantage. So make sure you have all the people on site. Designate an administrator, an RFID point of contact on site that knows more and can potentially even do some basic diagnostics. Things like take the reader off of the software and just run a read test. Document your escalation procedures. Know exactly how you're going to escalate from your on-site guys to your help desk, and then have a diagnosis tree. And what I mean by this, we talked about there being hardware, network, software, and power failures. Know what that set of questions is that need to be asked. The more support you can push towards level 0 and level 1, the cheaper your support gets, because you're not dispatching people and you're not taking your precious time with the IT people or your consultants or on-site vendors. And make sure you have a database to track what your issues were and your resolutions, because sure enough, it's the same thing that tends to break multiple times. What we use internally, and we actually use on all of our clients, and many of our clients have purchased, we use EasyReader to basically do everything. We have a product called EasyReader that does everything from the number 1, the installation, through number 2, the training. So all of your site plans are in there, all the reports are generated automatically, all my configurations are tracked, my histories of my configurations are tracked, and then we use something called Easy Monitor, which is an ongoing support tool to figure out, hey, what is the diagnostic step? So one of our customers, for example, Shaw Industries, they have 40 distribution centers across the country, and they have a different diagnostic tree in what to ask the people than someone like Airbus has, because they're deploying different equipment in different environments. So the questions you're going to ask is going to vary based on your use case.